to our live stream Q&A, Ask Me Anything. We do this every Friday as well as Saturdays here at the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel, where I answer all of your questions about history and social studies. And we're keeping up with the Thanksgiving theme. We did our Thanksgiving live stream just a couple days ago on Wednesday. I hope everybody, especially here in the United States, had an incredible Thanksgiving and a very, very joyful day full of gratitude and Thanksgiving, literally, and all of that stuff. But we're back today, Q&A. You can ask me anything you'd like about history or social studies, and I'm starting a little bit earlier than I normally do, about 3 hours earlier than I normally do, because I want to give some time consideration to all of the people who join us all over the world, and they of course join us at much later times than the United States. The United States is near the western end of the world when it comes to time zones, so there's people who join us from all over the place. And they do a great job coming to the channel and everything. But they're up late at night usually when we usually stream at 6 p.m. Eastern on Fridays and Saturdays for our Q&A, and 4 p.m. Eastern for our live stream lecture on Sunday. And despite the fact that we did do our live stream lecture already this week on the first Thanksgiving and its history with an emphasis on Native perspectives, that was Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern. Please go watch that when you have time. We are going to be doing another live stream lecture this Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern, and you guys get to vote here exclusively on YouTube for the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel and for our live stream lecture. So for the next hour or so today, before you vote on that, you can ask me any questions you'd like about history or social studies. Drop a comment, topic, or question in the chat, and I will be sure to answer it in a friendly, neighborly manner, in a timely manner as well. And I am joined, we're still keeping the theme of Thanksgiving going, with the Pilgrims and Indians meeting together in the background for the first Thanksgiving in 1621, although it wasn't officially called that for quite some time. And yes, James Madison can indeed be a live stream lecture topic. We might discuss that. We might discuss anything you'd like. People always recommend topics, and they usually get voted on eventually. So I will be updating the topics that you guys can vote on for what we will be doing our live stream lecture on at 4 p.m. Eastern on Sunday. We also have, of course, today and tomorrow for Q&A, where you can ask me anything you'd like about history and social studies. Tomorrow will be our usual time, 6 p.m. Eastern, but today I wanted to do it early and just have a afternoon and evening to myself afterwards. But before you go out and party and enjoy your Friday and your Thanksgiving weekend, learn some historical knowledge and information that you can impress your friends with when you go out clubbing, and they'll be very, very impressed with you, especially if they're still sober. But hope everybody, again, had a wonderful Thanksgiving, and please like and subscribe. Anything you can do to help the channel really does help. Of course, we have memberships available for early access. We have our social medias here, such as our Substack. I have been posting a Substack article every day this week. We have Patreon with early access to content, as well as my First Ladies series, which I think I'm done with. We also have TikTok, where you can get extra content that you won't get here, and there's stuff on here that you won't get on TikTok. So follow us on both platforms, please. Anything you can do to help the channel means a lot. So yes, for the next hour or so, I will be answering all of your questions about social sciences and the like, as we normally do here on the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel. Again, if you want to become a member and get early access, anything you do to help the channel helps the channel. And of course, there is also the ability to give a super chat and all of that. So, but when did you acknowledge? Yeah, well, Raman, right after you told me that you were the same way. No, not often enough. Did dictator Mao do anything positive? Well, Mao ended the nationalist regime in China. Of course, we know Mao more from the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution, the suppression of rights, the privation of the Chinese people, the famines that were caused by the Great Leap Forward, and the collectivization of the farming industry in China, which was the backbone of the Chinese economy. This, of course, led to tens of millions of deaths. However, Mao ended the very repressive and draconian nationalist regime, which had basically terrorized the Chinese population, mistreated the peasants and abused them. And this is how Mao and the Gomchangdan, the Communist Party, were actually able to gain a head of steam that allowed them to use the large population of China to their advantage and win the revolution, was by manipulating and representing themselves as the champions of the peasantry, which was easy for them to do, considering how these peasantry were not only the majority of the people in China, but had been an underclass that had been oppressed and forgotten about by both the Chinese emperors and the Qing dynasty, as well as, of course, by the nationalist Kuomintang. So yes. What were the main issues for the United States in John Quincy Adams' presidency? John Quincy Adams, the son of course, John Adams, who became president in 1824, suffered one of the most miserable examples of gridlock in presidential history. He had been elected in a very contentious election against Andrew Jackson. The House of Representatives, led by Henry Clay, had swayed the election to him because no one had gotten a majority of the electoral votes. Yes, in a U.S. presidential election, when no one gets a majority, the House of Representatives has to decide, and the House of Representatives Speaker was Henry Clay, who swayed many of the members to vote for John Quincy Adams, which allowed him to become president in 1824. Now, John Quincy Adams picked Clay to be his Secretary of State, which many saw as a stepping stone to the presidency, and because of this, he was accused by Andrew Jackson and his large contingent of followers of being corrupt. This led him to not pick anyone who was supportive of his ideas and create a more divided government, which wasn't extremely efficient. And Jackson and his followers, believing that Adams had become president through corruption, did everything they could to waylay his political plans and his agenda in Congress. And this is the foundations, by the way, of the Democratic Party in U.S. history. And this made it extremely hard for him to get anything accomplished. Based off of Henry Clay and working with Clay, Adams had this idea of what's called the American system, which was a series of infrastructure projects, buildings, roads, canals, bridges, and highways to connect a growing United States with more and more frontier territory available for settlers and pioneers. And although Jackson himself would follow through on many of Adams' policies, and the two of them were not heavily different politically, kind of a Nixon-Kennedy relationship in many ways politically, Adams was not able to achieve what he wanted to due to political gridlock, infighting, and charges of corruption. So his presidency was absolutely miserable. So there you go. Of course, Oxygen, my pleasure. In your opinion, what was the most tense moment between Calhoun and Clay in U.S. history? Well, not directly, but John C. Calhoun, who was vice president for both John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson, was threatened to be hanged by Andrew Jackson for encouraging his home state of South Carolina to ignore and nullify federal law with the Tariff Act, the nullification ordinance, basically where South Carolina said it was a sovereign state and didn't have to follow federal law, was one of the first efforts by the sovereign states, it would not be the last, to ignore federal laws, federal leadership, and eventually this would lead to secession. And Andrew Jackson, who believed in preserving the federal union, did everything he could to basically force South Carolina to toe, including threatening to hang his very own vice president, John C. Calhoun, who, despite being his vice president, was one of his biggest political foes. If you didn't know that by him threatening to hang him, then you certainly do now. Check out my entire series on U.S. presidents, where I talk about all of these guys, like John Quincy Adams, Andrew Jackson, all the way down to President Trump and President Biden, the most recent American presidents. So yes. History of Black Friday. I don't know what made Black Friday such a big shopping day. Obviously, Black Friday was the day where people started decorating for Christmas in recent years and listening to Christmas music. People thought it was more culturally appropriate, but people are listening to Christmas music as soon as Halloween is over. So Black Friday has lost a lot of its appeal, and now it's become an entire shopping week. The consumerism of Amazon has basically kind of dwarfed the blitzes, the blitzkriegs, where people have been trampled. Some people have been killed or severely injured looking for deals in Targets, Walmarts, Sam's Clubs, and of course, Best Buy and stuff like that. So that has kind of gone the way of the dodo bird, because now it's weeks of Black Friday deals. And Black Friday deals are talked about at the beginning of November, and there's weeks before that. And Amazon obviously makes everything a lot easier, kind of getting rid of the consumerist congestion that left Black Friday with a lot of psychological scars for the nation. So yeah, let me see here. Andrew Jackson hated small goblin and often harvested their green blood. Sounds like something he would do. Christmas is a pagan holiday that was baptized by Christians. From my knowledge, Christmas originally a Christian holiday with St. Nick and the birth of Christ in 100 AD with the early church, but some things were introduced with Prince Albert. Prince Albert was from Germany, and he brought the Christmas tree that was a common tradition amongst Germans of both Christian and pagan ancestry to England with his wife, Queen Victoria, and a lot of these Victorian traditions became popular not only in Great Britain, but in the United States as well. And of course, Charles Dickens puts Christmas even more on the map. Christmas was not the overwhelmingly popular holiday it is today. Dickens's reading and writing of the Christmas Carol and the mainstream actions of Albert and Victoria brought a new flavor to everything. And if you want to learn more, listen to me read the Christmas Carol as you get ready for your holiday season. Mr. Lewis, it's great to have you back. Bonfire might night was originally pagans, the Beltane fires. Yes, many of these holidays had pagan tinges that were eventually baptized. Christians were, of course, celebrating the birth and resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth, their leader, for centuries before this, but reimagining ancient Roman and paganic festivals with Christian lenses was kind of a marrying of the church and the state after Constantine legalized Christianity and became the dominant religion in the Roman Empire in the early 4th century. The winter solstice was celebrated long before Christmas. Yes, that's true. Celebrations of the winter solstice were common all throughout the world. I don't know why it's a race or a competition. Reread The Christmas Carol in middle school. Hopefully, still force these kids to read it. I read it around that time, and I've taught it, and you can listen to me do the audio narration here on the Friendly Neighborhood History channel. Go to my playlist on The Christmas Carol, and you can listen to me read The Christmas Carol as a gift to all of you last Christmas. I personally think the most interesting case in U.S. history is Brown v. Board and the Little Rock Nine. Yes, and I am currently doing a series for everyone here on YouTube on the history of the U.S. Supreme Court. So if you want to learn more about those cases, check out my upcoming video on that. If you want to learn about how a U.S. president became the head of the Supreme Court and is the one who gave the Supreme Court its building, William Howard Taft, go and watch my video from this past Monday, and you can watch my video about Thanksgiving and its history and the cynicism of Thanksgiving, where I read one of my Substack articles, where I write blogs here on YouTube. There is at least one members-only video coming out before Monday, which will cover the Industrial Revolution, as that's a series I'm doing for members only on this channel. But yes, enough broadcasting and advertisement. Other questions, topics, questions, comments about history or social studies. Watch The Nutcracker. The Nutcracker is a fantastic ballet and an incredible story. How long have you known you're part black? I would be honored if I was. When will be your next Supreme Court video? I'll watch that. Probably Monday. Supreme Court is 1,000% unconstitutional. Not according to the Federal Judiciary Act, which was literally passed by the same people who helped write the Constitution in 1789. What is your favorite Supreme Court case? Wong Kim Ark versus the United States. Wong Kim Ark was and I did a video on this a couple months ago. Wong Kim Ark was a Chinese man. Well, he was an American Chinese man whose parents had come from China, and he had been born in the United States, and he left the United States but was refused and went back to China. But when his family returned, he was refused entry to the United States, and this eventually set up the right of the soil, jus soleil, which basically said that because he was born in the United States, he was a citizen, which of course is extraordinarily controversial for a lot of people today, but in 1895 is one of the biggest Supreme Court cases of the time as well. Vikings scarred the lands of England. A lot of them settled. In fact, Alfred the Great, the great English king, slow burn, allowed the Vikings to settle and kind of split the country in half, and it was called the Danelaw. So yes, I do know about that too. What do you think about Assassin's Creed? Not wholly historically accurate, but entertaining. If I ever get my U.S. citizenship and they ask me where I learned from, I'm going to tell them to look you up. Well, that'd be fantastic. I'm very, very honored, Mr. Lewis, by that. Do you think it gets people interested in history? I like things that get people interested in history, even if they are not accurate. Braveheart is one of my favorite movies. It's not extremely historically accurate, but it does get people involved in the historical stories of William Wallace and the English. And Longshanks, by the way, in the actual history is an incredible king. He's not this cruel, over the top. He's no different than any other medieval king. In my opinion, in my perspective, if I have to go out on a limb, Edward Longshanks, better known in history as Edward I, is the greatest king in English history. He's not the greatest monarch. That's Elizabeth I, but he's the greatest king, greatest man to ever sit on the English or British throne. Do you think it gets people? Yeah, it does get people interested in history. Thank you, computer. No, I haven't seen that. It's good to see you, who, what, where, but yeah, I have not seen that. I'll have to check into that. So thank you for joining us on Black Friday for our Q&A, Ask Me Anything. I'm not advertising. I'm not selling you anything. I don't have any special deals going on. If you want to become a member, if you want to give a super chat, you absolutely can. I would be very, very honored and flattered. But this is no charge, absolutely free. The only thing I'm asking you for is your time. And time is money, so I get it. You are. But you probably have a day off if you're joining us right now, and liking and subscribing is absolutely free, so thank you so much for doing that if you do. Roman movies are great. Very few are very accurate in more than a few aspects. That's true. I'm Schrodinger's chick. I'm not sure if I'm rich or poor until you observe me. Please chat. That's hilarious. I feel like your ideology definitely has a leftist element to it. Thanks. You look so impregnable. Well, I don't know if Mossad has ever tried to impregnate a man, but I feel like that's something they would try to do, so yeah. So what's the history of time travel? Going back in the past, regret is a huge part of the human experience. Anyone who is critical on a personal, on a micro or macro scale will, of course, have a desire to go back in time and fix things. The discussions of time travel have gone back centuries. Newton basically made a huge change in scientific history with his theories about time, which I think basically says that time is a measurable unit and time is a constant. And of course, this it changes with relativity, and Einstein has his own contributions there. But humans have wanted to time travel for a long time, and I think they've basically proven most modern physics that probably impossible. I have not watched Death by Lightning, but I'll have to check it out. As a Dutch person, it still amazes me how big the VOC was. Yes, and they controlled New York and New Jersey for a long period of time. And then the English kind of forced them out. Um, Time travel is crazy. Time travel is crazy. Do you have a girlfriend, and how? I don't need to. I don't need to explain my personal life. How is all the history riz? There you go. Um, Let me see. What do you know about? What do I know about what? Anyways, other questions. No, it's not. But it's possible to go forward in time. I don't think so. What do you know about Barron Trump's marvelous underground journey? Nothing. Death by Lightning is about the assassination of James Garfield, and it looks at Garfield and his assassin Andrew Conkling. It wasn't Conkling who killed him; it was Charles Guiteau, who killed James Garfield. It was doctors who messed up his recovery. He might have survived an assassin's bullet, but yeah. The American invasion of Lebanon? What are you referring to? Are you referring to the attack in Beirut in the 1980s where hundreds of people were killed, some of them Americans? I don't know a huge amount about special relativity. I'm a historian. This is a history channel, so I know a little bit about science, but not nearly enough to comment on it with any sort of authority. But I do know enough about these historical figures like Einstein, Newton, Kepler, all of those guys to comment on the scientific revolution, modern scientific discoveries, and things like that. And of course, the contributions of the Nobel Prize, which was created by a scientist, Alfred Nobel, who invented dynamite. So there you go. That's where we get the Nobel Prize from. Anyways, other questions about history or social studies? And good to see you, Gaihan. Thank you for joining us. Longtime friendly neighborhood historians are here. That's always good to see. And you can become a friendly neighborhood historian too if you just like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. I had a good Thanksgiving. I hope you had one too. It's good to see you. San Francisco used to have a mysticism or almost magic-like feel. Yes, beautiful city. Obviously, a lot of it could be the gravitational the defying of gravity by most of the city, the way it's built, the hills, the rolling hills, and all of that. And it's beautiful by the bay. It's an incredible city in many many ways, both in the way it was developed and also in its geography and topography. Was there a beard law in Russia during the Industrial Revolution or a beard tax? I don't know about during the Industrial Revolution. Many of the czars had facial hair at that time, but Peter the Great instituted one when he westernized the Russians, beard taxed, even plucked beards and shaved beards off personally in the early 18th century. And every time I shave, I think about that. I've been obsessed with pirates lately. Tell us about American pirates. Piracy, when we think of pirates, we think of what Disney has given us through Pirates of the Caribbean and stuff like that. Piracy is an ancient human practice that existed in almost all parts of the globe. The Barbary pirates are perhaps the most invasive pirates there ever have been in northern Africa, who for centuries were kidnapping people from all over Europe. They even went as far as Ireland and Iceland to kidnap white Europeans and sell them into slavery. The pirates we think of when we think of piracy are people like Edward Teach, aka Blackbeard, and Redbeard, and other pirates during what's called the Golden Age of piracy, kind of started by Captain Henry Morgan, who in the early 16th century, who worked for the English in the 16th century, was instrumental in them capturing Jamaica from the Spanish, but was known for cruelty. These were what they were called privateers, and the English government basically allowed these people to sail as private ships, doing whatever damage they could to foes. As long as they didn't attack English ships or steal English cargo, they were basically allowed to operate as they wanted to in the West Indies, aka the Caribbean, and that starts this tradition of piracy. Now, a lot of pirates were not privateers. They were simply rogues who wanted to steal as much booty and goods and as they could. A lot of them did it for believing that they would make more and be more successful if they went out on their own limb rather than working for a particular government. And many of them were hunted down and killed. Edward Teach, for instance. Let me see. What else? What other questions? Any idea about Nicholas Tesla? Nikolai Tesla was a Serbian national who immigrated to the United States, and of course is known for Tesla coils, his experiments with electricity. He invented many other great things, and of course the idea of alternating current, which is eventually used as the way that electricity moves from one source to another. So yeah. Do you think the Gulf War was Sipester? Do you think the Gulf War was justified? What was the result of the Gulf War under George Bush Sr.? It's an interesting war that people don't talk about enough. It's called Operation Desert Storm, where basically the United States and its UN allies went in and toppled Saddam Hussein's invasion in Kuwait and could have easily overthrown his government and gotten rid of him 15 years before Bush's son would do that. Bush's son was labeled as trying to finish Daddy's war because of his invasion of Iraq, Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2003, 2004. But it was a very successful campaign. It took Saddam away from oppressing Kuwait and monopolizing the oil. Basically, all of these countries relied on oil from that region, from the Gulf Coast, and so obviously they didn't want Saddam to have his fingers all over it, and they knew what Saddam was capable of. He had just finished a war against the Iranians, so it seems to have been a justified war by all intents and purposes. You don't want a dictator accessing a large supply of resources at the risk of oppressing huge amounts of people, and then and you don't want someone who's that brutal cornering the market on something. So there was a commercial and economic interest as well as a geopolitical and moral one with the United States in Operation Desert Storm. And thank you, computer. I try to remember as much as I possibly can. Let me see. Can you tell us the real version of how the founding fathers felt about the Constitution after they were in power and realized the oligarchs were innately to dictate the working class? That's not what they felt, so that's incorrect, Tom. Did the founding fathers celebrate Thanksgiving, or is it more of a modern development? They celebrated it, but not in an official capacity. It had been celebrated off and on regionally, like many American holidays. It doesn't become an official holiday until Lincoln in the 1860s. Ben Franklin wanted to make the turkey the national bird. I know a little bit about Saddam. He had two very, very controversial sons who were known for acts of terrorism and barbarism as well. And a very happy Thanksgiving, Shuriken. I took a course on Caribbean Piracy, Old West Outlaws, and 20th Century America Crime Syndicate back in the day. Could have been great, but the professor botched it. I can imagine. Well, those things are not as prevalent as we think. We think that if we were to go back in time to the Caribbean in the early 1700s, all we'd see is pirates. If we went back to the Wild West, all we'd see is gunslingers. If we went back to the 1920s New York, all we'd see is the mafia. These were cells of activity in pretty uproarious and harsh reality, but they were not as prevalent. They weren't universal. It wasn't everywhere like we think it was. But it was. But I mean, that sounds like it could have been a fascinating class if it had been handled correctly. Did the U.S. have connections with that guy from Al Qaeda who did 9/11? I think he was Saddam Hussein. He hid in Pakistan. You mean Osama bin Laden? Yes, the U.S. had connections with him in the past. I strongly recommend you read Thomas Jefferson and John Adams' Relation. I knew you would say that. Well, John Adams, they of course realized that there were difficulties with any system of government they founded. Interestingly enough, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson didn't write any of the Constitution. They were both foreign secretaries, foreign ministers, Adams in England and Jefferson in France. They had nothing to do with the direct writing of the Constitution. Do you like the movie Gangs of New York? It's just, I've never really seen it. I've seen parts of it. It's an interesting one. But again, it's exaggerating Irish gangs and Tammany Hall and the political corruption of the 1860s and 70s in the democratic political machine in New York, where Irish immigrants and their descendants used a lot of, used the city's machinations, political machinations to ostensibly to help their people, but really to help themselves. Why was organized crime so rampant in Chicago as it grew? Bootlegging activities usually created choke points at certain areas. Large immigrant populations of any background have had organized crime related to it. The Irish, the Italians, the Chinese, the Jews, and now we can see it maybe with Latin American immigrants and the cartels representing that. Now, these aren't definitive or indicative of the entire immigrant group that came to the United States during the Industrial Revolution, but there always seem to be people who basically tried to live out the American dream by basically becoming by more scurrilous matters rather than working extremely hard and struggling. A lot of people have been told when they immigrated to the United States there'd be streets paved with gold and life would be easy, and it wasn't, and a lot of people suffered hard, and some decided to not suffer hard but to act uh, uh, in more shady and seedy manners in order to get the wealth and the glory and the gold that they wanted. Southern California. Well, thank you for joining us from Southern California. We've got people from all over the world who come, and I'm always so thrilled with that. Hello, Tom. Good to see you. When Plymouth Rock was founded, there were working towns in Florida, and Southwest had cow towns. Well, yeah, there was already there was already Jamestown. There had already been Roanoke. The English, this wasn't the first English settlement. What and there were Catholic settlements. St. Augustine is the first permanent settlement in what's now the United States in 1565 by the Spanish. What colonists met with friendlier natives when they set up homes? The William Penn created a very tolerant, peaceful coexistence with the natives when he first founded Pennsylvania and Philadelphia in the 1670s. If you can time travel, which year in history will you go to? Well, there's so many. That's a great question. I often say I'd like to go to the late 19th century in Europe and see the modern the inventions of the Industrial Revolution, bringing Europe into the modern world. Europe at the top of its imperial power, electric lights coming on, going to Renoir exhibits. That just feels really, really amazing. But obviously, of course, that would also mean that I would want to look at the world of the colonial world and see what life was like for those who were being oppressed by the imperialism and paternalism of the Europeans at that time. So late 19th century Europe is probably where I would go, but I wouldn't want to stay there. If I'm from Denmark, we have Vikings and stuff. Yes, indeed. Osama bin Laden, what were the U.S. connections with him? Does it point to the U.S. plotting 9/11? No, that's absurdity. I know that Tucker Carlson might have you believe that, but I don't know what Tucker Carlson believes on the subject. But I'm used to him saying something outrageous about history, which is what he did his Piers Morgan interview with yesterday, which somebody already was asking my opinion about, and I'm tired of people who do not know anything about history thinking they know more about history than people who've actually studied it their entire lives. I don't know when Venom 3 will come out. I have no idea. I'm not prescient. Which U.S. state has the most interesting history? I guess it would be one of the New England ones, but Texas. Texas is fascinating. I think Florida's pretty fascinating, talking about the St. Augustine, talking about how Andrew Jackson basically kidnapped Florida from the Spanish. The English and the French held claims to Florida before and after the Spanish did. It's kind of this strange thing where Florida keeps shifting hands and eventually the Americans grab it. Of course, Florida also has the most controversial electoral results in U.S. history in the 2000 election. It has a connection to the South, but it's not Southern in many ways. It's obviously got large, significant importance during the Cold War because of Cuba and the Cuban Missile Crisis. Every U.S. state has a fascinating and interesting history, but if you're going to think about California, if you're going to think about Texas, somebody mentioned Nevada. If you're going to think about the New England and the original 13 colonies that become the United States, obviously every one of them, Pennsylvania is a great example of that, has a fascinating history, but don't overlook Florida. Let me see here. Virginia is quite incredible too. So John Adams and Thomas Jefferson weren't involved in the Constitution and weren't part of the Founding Fathers. Well, they were part of the Founding Fathers. They both wrote and signed the Declaration of Independence, and Jefferson is sending communiques and advice to James Madison throughout the Constitutional Convention. But Washington had picked Madison to write most of the document, thinking that the Virginia delegation could have a swaying influence over the remediation of the Articles of Confederation, which it was originally supposed to be, but Washington had already given up on the Articles and believed it was time for something new. The Constitutional Convention originally met to redo the Articles of Confederation, but Washington knew that it wasn't going to last, that it really had made things too weak. So, Adams and Jefferson had influence and obviously a huge political say both before and after the Constitution, but were not directly involved in the writing of the Constitution. They weren't in the United States when it was written. Of course, Jefferson becomes part of the anti-federalist group that's very, very committed to making sure that individual liberties are defined and codified with the Bill of Rights. Madison at first was very skeptical of this, but eventually came closer to his longtime Virginia friend on this. So yeah, there you go. There's a little bit of history there just for free. Welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel and to our live stream Q&A Ask Me Anything, where you can ask me anything you'd like about history and social studies. We're halfway through, and you can stay for the other half. It's great to see everybody. Hope you're having a really, really wonderful weekend or beginning of your weekend, and hope you all had a great Thanksgiving. Let me see here. Why did UK lost its world power status? Why did it give up colonies like the U.S. and other colonies? Well, the Americans and the Soviets after the last World War, which I consider to be World War III, put pressure on the British to decolonize, the French too, and without backing from the United States, the British, who were weakened by the war, despite the efforts of the monarchy at first and the conservatives in power, like Churchill and Macmillan, weren't able to hold on to their territorial holdings, so decolonization was kind of bum rushed in places like Africa and Asia. Although those processes of decolonization, the calls for decolonization by the natives of those areas had existed for decades, the French and the British weren't really ready to let that happen. So that's kind of why the British Empire disintegrated. Let me see here. Why did UK? Oh, I already answered that question. What were the Scottish stories? I don't know a lot about them. I know that Rudolf Hess, when he didn't defect, but when he sent a warning as a and was captured, he was captured in Scotland in 1940, I think. Does AI development scare you, like it does with me? I mean, we'll see how good it gets, but I'm not scared right now. AI can be very helpful in learning basic information and giving platitudinous interpretations, but there is no one better to ever interpret what has happened in human history than a human himself. And I believe I am one of those humans. Let me see here. Thank you for subscribing, Noah. I really appreciate that. That's very kind of you. Were Germanic tribes the introducers to beer? No, the Egyptians were brewing beer 5,000 years ago. Is this? But it's good to see you, Jane. Is this major or something or a hobby? It's I have a master's in history. It's a hobby. We are monetized, so you can live super chat anytime you like. And there's members only content available. But yeah, it's my passion and it's my hobby, and hopefully one day I could do this full time. That'd be a lot of fun. Did Stalin purge a significant portion of the original revolutionary Bolsheviks as his paranoia grew? Yes, but he'd already targeted them like Bukharin and Trotsky long before this. Stalin was extraordinary. People think of Stalin as brutal, and of course Stalin means man of steel, so there's this idea of Stalin as just kind of a warlord, of this brutal dictator, but Stalin believed was extraordinarily shrewd and believed himself to be a proper communist intellectual. He doesn't have the rapport of Lenin or Trotsky when it comes to writing and understanding communist philosophy and reinterpreting it in his context, as both of them had done. But he does think himself an intellectual. He does think himself intellectually at least on some sort of level playing field with his communist rivals. And his shrewdness and manipulation was already on display long before paranoia. Stalin may have very well been paranoid, but to say that all of his machinations in the grand purges of the late 30s is because of his paranoia really is an insult to understanding to an insult to his mind and how brutal and repressive he actually was, and how much hatred he had for anyone who opposed him. That isn't paranoia. That is a level of paranoia and power hungriness that exists with only the worst of dictators. But it's also a desire to scope out your enemies and destroy them whenever you see fit, because you don't think they're good enough and you think you are. So megalomania is part of what Stalin was doing. Power control, believing that he was the proper successor of a revolution. Stalin believed those things. These weren't things that he just threw out as platitudes. I believe Stalin believed he was a real good communist. Whether he was or not is a debate for another time, but Stalin really believed what he was doing was right for the party, right for the revolution, and ultimately right for Russia. And Emir, thank you so much for the donation. I really, really appreciate it. And yes, a lot of great questions in the chat today. So love having you here. Did they eat meat? Did who eat meat? Who are you referring to? Well, PC, thank you for screaming your answers by capitalizing, by going all caps. I'm an American historian, meaning I'm a historian from America, and although I'm a European historian by trade, I've studied a lot of American, I've done a lot of history on America, and I don't know what do you mean by pro-America? Do I love America as an American? Yes. Do I love everything about American history? No. But do I find it American history and culture fascinating? Absolutely. So there's the best answer you're going to get. A recent genre study says a part about 1/7 of the Indians. Yes, you already said that. They had Mayan ancestry. Yeah. I'm not a full-blown patriot in the sense that I am able to criticize the United States, and if you believe in the American system, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and all of those things, you would be perfectly fine with someone criticizing America and its past. It's the goal is to create a more perfect union, and to do that, you must recognize what is not perfect and what can be perfected. So, got any suggestions on for documentaries to watch? Yes, Ken Burns's American Revolution. I haven't watched a lot of it, but I want to watch more of it, and will spend a decent amount of my weekend catching up on that. Beer and wine was probably discovered accidentally by multiple cultures. Fermentation was safer than drinking water in many places, including in Egypt, where the Nile was king. Tut's tomb had a chariot and composite bows, both brought to Egypt via the Hyksos. The Hyksos were a Semitic people who settled in the Levant, but eventually conquered Egypt for a short amount of time, and they're the ones that brought the chariot to Egypt, between the Old and Middle Kingdoms. Was it you who said Warren Buffett died? I think he's still alive. Yes, I was incorrect about that. I did that on a video the other day. I read a headline on it, and I didn't double check it, so I was incorrect about that one. You can disregard that video. I did give another news story. I give daily news updates every day because I'm sick and tired of how subjective all the media is, how they pretend they carry these airs of objectivity, but they are constantly just trying to manipulate you into believing what they want. Reporting the truth in an accurate and fair manner is not that hard. So, do you know how to get onto the History Channel as a historian? The History Channel doesn't do history anymore, so yeah. We need normal and medieval centuries. Sure, okay. Respect from London. Thank you for joining us, Samuel. And I'm glad to have you here. We went live earlier today. We usually go live at 6 p.m. Eastern, which I mean is like 11 o'clock over in the UK. But we went live earlier today. It's only like 9 o'clock over there almost, because we wanted to act. We know there's people all around the world who watch this channel. We want to be respectful of their time and not have them up all at night. But I am known for curing insomnia, so. Let me see here. I hope it becomes full-time. It's cool to see someone doing something that's not absolutely useless. Well, thank you. And I appreciate you being here. You being here is not absolutely useless. Did Deng Xiaoping, the real reason China is so futuristic and rich today? Yes, that's the name of the man I've been looking for. Deng Xiaoping was one of Mao's lieutenants who eventually became the leader of China's economic resurgence in the 1980s and became more open to at least some sort of cooperation between the communist state and free marketry, which allowed China's enterprise and industry to boom in the 1980s and 90s. Did you hear the latest facts about Srebrenica, who Americans mostly did pay to kill children, women, men for sports? No, I haven't, Mercy, but I'm always willing to learn more. Yeah. Stalin had one thing right: reject Islam and sexual deviance. Stalin was getting ready. I don't know about rejecting Islam. The communists rejected all religions, so I don't know if Islam really got it. By the way, a lot of people think Hitler was a Christian. Hitler was not. He hated Christianity, at least the message of Christianity. He understood its cultural significance to the German people, and that he would never have been in power without Christians voting him in. But he also admired Islam because of what he believed was aggression. He believed the aggression of Islam and its history was quite admirable. Stalin rejected Islam probably because he rejected all religions, and Islam was a significant minority in many Soviet Union countries before, during, and after the rise of Stalin. So, and if you talk about sexual deviance, I don't know what you mean by that. I'm assuming you're coming from the right on this perspective. The Soviet Union was the first country in the world to legalize abortion. The Soviet Union was the first country in the world to grant complete egalitarianism between women and men. And functionally, this was extremely poor, but all of that is true, and Stalin was on the front lines when that happened in the early 1920s. You are in the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel. It's great to have you here. Do you like philosophy? I love philosophy. I love all social sciences. Of course, my expertise is in history, but it doesn't keep me from quoting Schopenhauer once in a while. There are two types of people in this world. Avoid both of them. Yeah, Trump said they are eating dogs and cats. Have there been traditions extended in history in any part of the world where they do this kind of stuff? How did Trump come to know about that? It was a ridiculously nonsensical thing to say. I don't want to give too much political analysis. I don't share my perspectives about politics and religion. But if Thanksgiving Rule 101, don't talk about politics or religion. But if you want more of a political analysis on Trump's immigration statuses, I sound like AI here, you can do a super chat. But Sunforge, there have been societies that domesticate smaller dogs and cats, and societies that have eaten them. Do you think it's accurate? The accounts of the Donner Party are credible? Somewhat. Probably some exaggeration. Remember, this is 175 years ago when this happened. People were more suspicious back then. What do you think of hardcore history? I don't know enough about it, if you're referring to a specific thing, but I do like to go hardcore with my history. And George Washington realized the Articles of Confederation wouldn't work. Did Americans want him to be a king or not? Isn't that advocating for anti-democracy? Okay, so with your leading questions, let me just wrap it up with a simple sentence. Washington did not want to be a king, but the people of America wanted him to be a king. He chose to lay down power. There you go. Actually, that was two channels, but what? That was two sentences, but whatever. I don't know who Train is. Was weed as in marijuana normalized in the medieval century? In the medieval world, no. Experiments with hashish, which is a more concentrated, stronger form of marijuana. Usages of hemp were quite common for growing rope. Thomas Jefferson grew hemp for that. But widespread consumption of marijuana happens in some societies, or at least derivatives or similar cousins of weed. But the modern form of cannabis that we see all the time, not as common in ancient societies. But drugs have all and consumption of drugs have been common in almost every civilization. And if you want to add alcohol as a drug, you certainly can. The Mayans, for instance, practiced boofing, where they ingested wine to help them have hallucinations anally. Yes, that is absolutely true. Japan is not advanced, not in technology, but culture. Japan is pretty technologically advanced. Was financed Who financed the colonization of Mexico, the United States, and Canada? Well, the Spanish, they didn't call it that back then. The Spanish, French, and British. And individual companies, joint stock companies. The English loved these things. The West Indies Company. There was a British East Indies and West Indies Company. The London Company helps found Jamestown, for instance. There were French joint stock companies, the VOC, the Dutch India Company. They eventually set up shop in what is New York and New Jersey, so there's a little bit of that. Obviously, the conquistadores were funded by the Spanish government. This led to the colonization of Central and South America. Cortez was not supposed to land there. He disobeyed the orders of the governor of Cuba to land in Mexico, but once he landed there and encountered the Aztecs, he felt they were barbarous and that God had chosen him to make them suffer horribly, because that's how a loving God would act. So there's a little bit there. Hi, TXX, good to see you. Comanche native, that's really cool. Thank you for joining us. The reason the US was founded is because of the spices. Kind of, but there were spices in India. That's where they really needed to go. Humans literally changed wolves to become dogs for helping humans, not for eating them. Chickens, pork, beans were domesticated to eat. True. Did the Scottish help in World War One? Well, which World War are you referring to? Because there's three World Wars, in my opinion. The 7 Years' War is the First World War. The Great War is World War II. And the war with the Nazis and the Japanese is World War III. If you're referring to the traditional World War I, the Scottish were part of the British forces, and they were in the 7 Years' War as well. So the answer would be yes for both of those. Why didn't Japan ally with Germany? Italy supported nationalist China against Mao. A good question. Japan was far more interested in conquest and militarism under the Tojo military complex than they were in anything else. So when the Japanese invade at the Marco Polo Bridge incident, the Second Sino-Japanese War starts in 1937. The communists were the minority opposition to the nationalist group that seemed like they were going to win the Civil War, and had sent the communists on the run with the Long March, where Mao had been forced to flee from the south of China to the northeast of China in 1934. So it never seemed like the communist Goncangdong really had a chance. The United States and Great Britain would later turn on the People's Republic, but did support Mao during the war because he was against the Japanese. Once again, an example of the United States supporting someone they would later turn on, or have turn on them, whichever way you want to look at it. And Hugh Hefner of history. Yes, indeed. History Hefner. So Japan, the Germans, and the Italians Mao wasn't really in power. They didn't think of Mao and the communists that much. For them, it was just the nationalist Japanese were better than the nationalist Chinese government, which was the main Republic of China under Jiang Shi, or as we know him in the West, Chiang Kai-shek. And thank you so much, Samuel. I really appreciate that. Do you think the Aztecs came from Utah? Probably not. What do you know about beard tax? It was the tax given by Peter the Great in the early 18th century amongst the Russian nobility, the boyars, to try to force them to become Western. Yes, we know who you are. It's great to see you, Mr. Kitty Cat. How many kids you got? I don't know. How many do you want? From heroin, weed, shrooms, which was the most consumed drug before the 19th century, excluding alcohol. That's true. And LSD was originally experimented and used in scientific things. The original Coca-Cola had cocaine in it. Let me see here. Excuse me. We keep it real on this live. Portuguese came here to Goa before they went to Japan. Why Goa couldn't make an empire like how Japan made? Well, they were close enough to an empire that was already there called the Mughal in India. There were far more established empires in the east like the Qing and the Mughal than there were in Native America. Let me see. I know the Opium War was pretty big. What was the impact of the Opium War? The Opium War, which I discussed in the live stream lecture last Sunday on the Qing Dynasty and the fall of China's empire, was basically the Chinese government had had good trade relations with the British for spices and teas and European textiles and luxury goods, but they had become quite tired of the more seedy trade of opium dealers who had created opium dens and brought in poppy seeds and refined them into basically a form of morphine and heroin, or well, it's opium, it's not morphine or heroin, but a sedative similar to those things that had really been hurting the productivity of the Chinese population because it had been proliferated amongst the working classes of China in many of its larger cities. They protested the shipments of this and the British government not doing anything more than a slap on the wrist. And so they blamed the British government, their military presences in some of their ports, and this led to the breakout of not one but two opium wars, and the British won both of them. And Uzi, we were talking about whatever you want to talk about because this is our Q&A where you can ask me, a historian, History Hefner, in my smoking jacket, anything you'd like about history or social studies. We do this every Friday and Saturday, usually at 6 p.m. Eastern, but I wanted to go live early today for the sake of everyone who is around the world joining us so that it's not too late for them. Who do you think specifically killed JFK? And do you think the CIA edited the Zapruder film? If so, for what reason? I don't know exactly who killed JFK. And I don't think it was Lee Harvey Oswald. I don't. I'm not one to get into conspiracy theories off the bat. I don't believe it's a conspiracy to say the CIA, the Mafia, or Lyndon Johnson had a hand in killing Kennedy. I just think it's too unclear. The metrics and the physics for Oswald killing Kennedy is bizarre. In many ways, the conspiracy theories have gotten so out of hand about it because a lot of people were so devastated by the loss of this young, wonderful man, John F. Kennedy, that it really paralyzed the nation. It created a huge cultural divide. It led to a lot of the problems of the rest of the 1960s, where the social fabric that had been so strong during the 50s started to unravel, and many people became quite horrified one way or another with what they were seeing. And a lot of the hope and optimism of the United States kind of died with Kennedy's death. It was kind of a falling from innocence moment for the United States when Kennedy was killed. A lot of people couldn't wrap their minds around that and couldn't possibly accept that one man could have killed him, so they developed the theories that they did, and some of them become quite conspiratorial. I mean, there's the Mossad theory, there's the Israel theory, which is basically what I get. Whenever I post a video on John F. Kennedy talking about the fact that he was killed, and we still really don't know who did it, and the Occam's razor doesn't really point to Oswald, then I get people who are saying it was Israel, which has less evidence than the Mafia or the CIA theory, for instance. There are many different conspiracy theories that go down many different rabbit holes, and some I think are more believable than others that Kennedy was killed. I don't buy the lone gunman Warren Commission narrative, but that doesn't mean that I don't trust the government with anything, and it doesn't mean that I believe everything is a conspiracy theory. I think the CIA is the most probable component, especially when you consider he wasn't going to get involved in Vietnam and they wanted him involved in Vietnam. I think that's a strong possibility that Kennedy was killed by the CIA. There's also the possibility the Soviet Union had a hand in it. Who knows exactly? But my whole point is that we can be agnostic about that point without buying into radical conspiracy theories just because we're horrified by the death of Kennedy. Like, who would want to kill such a nice guy? The colonization of Mexico wasn't just strictly because he viewed them as barbarians. It was cultural difference, resources, and a skewed view of religious supremacy. Yes, that's exactly what viewing someone as a barbarian usually entails, Tom. Which war do you think influenced modern battle tactics the most? The Crimean Wars, where you see the first machine guns, modern nursing comes into effect, Florence Nightingale. The Civil War, the use of ironclad warships impact European industrial military development in the late 19th century. And of course, when you get to the Great War, most of these things are finally hammered out completely. And because of the horrifying effects of things like chlorine and mustard gas, you have the Geneva Conventions and the banning of these things that haven't been used in modern warfare since. Steve Bannon says it was the French woman who actually started the French Revolution. There was a group of... Watch my video on the French Revolution from July for Bastille Day. Hars, can you put the link to the 7 Years' War, John F. Kennedy, and the French Revolution? I have long-form videos that usually come out Mondays and Fridays at 8 p.m. Eastern on all of these topics. and short-form content every day, and live streams every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, with the Q&As on Fridays and Saturdays, and the live stream lecture on Sunday. But yes, if you could put those 3 long-form videos, I talk about Kennedy, I talk about the French Revolution, and the women marching on the palaces, which is what GK is referring to. And of course, I also talk about the 7 Years' War being the First World War in my estimation. Thanks for that insight into Stalin, by the way. I guess it's better to view him as a totalitarian, strict authoritarian who expected everyone to fall in line. Is an exaggeration to view him as paranoid. I mean, at some point, there is a level in which all people with that amount of power are all paranoid. But was he any more paranoid than Mao, Pol Pot, Hitler? Hitler definitely showed some signs of mental decay and mental illness. He was on amphetamines, as were many of his other people. So, I mean, it's not impossible. Yes, Walter White has a lot in common with Hitler. There you go. Why is it so many culinary dishes accidents? Well, the Caesar salad, when they ran out of food, and this Mexican chef who ran a restaurant called Caesar's, his name was Caesar, in Tijuana, because Americans loved going there because they could drink during Prohibition. I ran out of food. There were so many people. And so he just threw together everything he had into a salad, and that became the Caesar salad. History of Bangladesh. Bangladesh was called East Pakistan. Pakistan is divided amongst Muslim majority areas of the Indian subcontinent, and mainland India, or the main country of India, is the Hindu majority nation. In 1947, that's how the British left it. It was a West and East Pakistan situation, and in 1971, I forget the name of the leader, Ramallah, I think was his name, helped them become independent from Pakistan and change their name to Bangladesh. The CIA killed Kennedy. Quite possible. How you look rich and homeless at the same time. I don't know how I look homeless, but thanks. You've smoked a cigar in that jacket, right? I feel like I remember you doing that a while back. Yes, I have. I don't smoke in the studio now. Just I'm in here so often, and I don't want the smell everywhere. Let me see here. Why didn't Yugoslavia last longer? The regime fell apart after Tito, the strongman who had kept them together, fell apart. And really, Yugoslavia was an experiment to try to force all these different Eastern European and Slavic groups to get along after the fall of the Austro-Hungarian Empire at the end of the Great War. Let me see here. If North Korea suddenly got freedom, would North Koreans still believe in the absurdities of the Kim family like a religion, or they'd hate the Kim family? Would they be considered a new religion? I don't know exactly. I think that the brain rot and the indoctrination is huge for those people, as it is for any people who are told myths long enough that they start to believe it. And that's why I talk about historical myths. I talked about one yesterday, that war is good for the economy. It isn't. If you gave him all the same amount of modern soldiers, which of the great conquerors in history would win? Napoleon. But it's not. But it'd be close. Good question. Yeah. It's possible LBJ was in on the Kennedy assassination. The Mafia is also a candidate for that. The Mafia had supposedly helped Kennedy win in 1960 through more scurrilous matters than just getting out the vote efforts. And then Kennedy and his brother Robert turned on the Mafia, turned on Frank Sinatra, who had used his celebrity influence and perhaps even his mob connections to help Kennedy win. This is all matter of fact. I'm not being conspiratorial. These are all possibilities. I am not Candace Owens. I actually know the facts. But my point is, it is possible that there's different explanations that I think all work. But the idea of a lone gunman who hated Kennedy and because he was a Marxist and just decided to kill him doesn't. There was the agitator George Giandes, I believe was his name. He worked for the CIA, and he was pushing Kennedy. He had associations with Kennedy through a pro-Cuban group that the CIA was agitating, kind of a counter-pro, where the CIA and FBI tried to get leftist organizations to commit acts of terror so they could destroy them. This was very common in the 60s. They may have even had ties to the Manson family. What will future history books say about recent years? I don't know. Historians tend to be more left-wing than right-wing. And I think there'll be a lot of critiques of Trump and the new populism that has stormed through the world. Brexit, things like this will be seen as mistakes by a lot of history and historical books, whereas they should just be seen as events and not mistakes. And if you want to read more about why we should look at history more objectively, both as pop historians, junior historians, historical lay people, or as academics with all the brilliance and far more education than even I have, go and read my Substack article from earlier today. Education doesn't necessarily mean being absolutely correct. I mention my education only when people ask about it. I'm not, and I am a historian, but so are you when you study history, and you can be a friendly neighborhood historian by liking and subscribing. Andaman and Nicobar Island, where the Japanese ate a whole battalion of Indian infantry. Ate them? Cannibalism? I haven't heard about that. Do you have an OnlyFans? No, but I'm assuming you would like to follow me if I did, so I'll take that as a compliment. Thank you, Angel. A lot of people couldn't wrap their minds around Kennedy assassination, but there was a plethora of assassinations or attempted assassinations on presidents. Yes, Theodore Roosevelt, first president to survive. Reagan was the only president in office to survive. Trump survived at least one assassination attempt where he was hit, and another one where he was targeted. Presidents, James Garfield, who I mentioned earlier, could have survived his assassination attempts if his doctors had been competent. But McKinley had been killed. Lincoln had been killed. Presidents have been killed and targeted for assassinations ever since the 1830s with Andrew Jackson, who the attempted assassin misfired. And sometimes and I think when you look at Lincoln and you look at Garfield, you can see a lone gunman doing a lone thing. It's pretty obvious in those instances. But when you look at Kennedy, there's too much shadiness going on behind the scenes. Yes, and please go check out my video on JFK and Camelot. One of my favorite American presidents, by the way. And this stream is about History and Social Studies Atlas, in case you haven't heard yet. I think everyone should listen to their own people's kind of music. Well, I think people should listen to all types of music. I do. Yes, this is a cooking show. We do talk about food here, because food and history go together. Hitler was coked out of his mind. Well, more like methed out of his mind. Did the natives have a celebration of harvest? Yes, they did. The natives were very much in touch with nature and very grateful to the spirits of the animals they killed for providing their skins and meat. And they had a very pantheistic view of the world where some of them. Okay, sorry. Whenever I get a phone call, it freezes on me. Whenever I get a phone call, it freezes on me. But basically, yes. The natives did celebrate the harvest. They did celebrate the nature around them. They had a pantheistic version of the world where the divine could be present in their different experiences. And those are the videos, by the way, French Revolution video, JFK and Camelot. You can learn about the women who marched on the palace, and that's where the famed, infamous, non-true story of Let Them Eat Cake comes from. There is a spectrum on how oligarchs view people who are less inferior in the so-called barbarism scale, from respect to full dehumanization. No, they viewed them as barbarians. I thought American Civil War was first to use Gatling gun in large-scale trench warfare. I think it was, but I'm pretty sure there had been trenches were used before then. But the Civil War used it more. I'm trying to think, were there machine guns in the Crimean War? I think there were. There was barbed wire wasn't patented until the 1870s. What's the names of the Women's March video? Well, it's in that French Revolution video. Why did Russia invade Afghanistan, and why are there so much backlash in the West? Russia invaded Afghanistan because they were trying to uphold a socialist-friendly government, which had been friendly to Moscow in Afghanistan, against more radical Islamic revolutions, probably connected and tied to and inspired, at least inspired by the Khomeini revolution in Iran, which was happening at the same time and embarrassing the heck of the United States. I am not Candace Owens. No, you're not Candace Owens, Jaden. You actually think about things. Let me see. If war is not good for the economy, explain how FDR saved his legacy after the 1937-38 recession. What else contributed to it, sir? Well, yeah, war was good. That's where people always go as the example. War is good for certain sectors of the economy, but it is not good in the sense of economic growth compared to a peacetime economic resurgence. So economic recoveries and economic growth in peacetime is greater than during warfare on a larger scale. I'm talking about proportionality. Yes, war is good in burst for certain sectors of the economy that focus on the production of weaponry, but it is not good for the consumer economy and things like that, especially when you have the rationing. And again, the problem is FDR's economy was extremely weak in the 1930s. He didn't solve the Great Depression. Hars, put up my video on FDR, Franklin Roosevelt. That might help you a little bit more. But yes, I understand what you're saying, but it's not fully. But Roosevelt was not living on Easy Street, and then the war came and things got a lot better. Yes, the war helped pull the United States out of the Great Depression because you could draft a bunch of people and send them off to war, basically fixing the unemployment crisis, and then you could put women in the factories, and the production did help the American economy. But the American economy grew more in the 50s, when it was a relatively peaceful time period, than in the 40s. And I don't have any chapstick, but I could use some. Matt, give a super chat so I can get some more chapstick. I did an entire video one day, and people were commenting that my lips were too chapped, and they get chapped because they're big, and that's the payment that I have to pay for having these wonderful lips, is that they get chapped easy. I made a video. People were critiquing my lips, so I made another revenge video where I explained the history of chapstick to those who were uninformed, which were most of them. But thank you, Matt, for making sure I drink more water. And Joe Kennedy was indeed a rum runner during the Prohibition days. And I think I mentioned that a little bit in the video on Kennedy. And Harry's here. Great. We've got my other wonderful moderator. Was monogamy more or polygamy more in the Roman Empire? Monogamy was actually more. And some of the Roman emperors, particularly Augustus, encouraged monogamy as a way and banished the poet Ovid and his own daughter Julia for not being monogamous. We think of the Romans as pretty sexually licentious. We think of the Greeks as being this way. And yes, they were in many cases. There was a lot of stuff in Greece that was particularly controversial with young men and older men. But the truth of the matter is, there was an understanding that societies do function with, and you obviously have to have a population built on male-female heterosexual monogamy that's good for culture. So polygamy was common in the ancient world, far more common than it is today. But again, you're using today's standards to judge the past, when in the past those were actually far less perverted than we'd like to think. That's just our own draconian Handmaid's Tale morality being applied back 3,000 or 2,000 years. Yes, trenches have always existed to some extent in warfare. Modern trench warfare really gets its going in the Crimean War and the Civil War. If the world was to end and you had to choose one country to restart human civilization, what country would it be and why? Thanks. That's a good question. Based on performance right now as an economic, technological, and military standings, the United States, China, India, Great Britain, those all stand as pretty formidable places. If you're looking at long-term scale invasions and problems with outside barbarism, Russia or Canada are very large and have a lot of spacious room in them. There's a lot of resources available. So let me see here. Hi, do you know anything about Captain Lord Nelson? Well, Horatio Nelson, the famous British naval commander who was able to defeat the French at Trafalgar, losing his life in the process, but basically kept Napoleon from ever feeling he could defeat the British without creating the continental system, which would eventually lead to his demise because the Russians were tired of the continental system, leading to Napoleon's failed invasion of Russia. So Nelson is a huge thorn in Napoleon's side. Was the Reichstag fire a false flag? Probably. Blamed on a Dutch communist? Probably not true. Who are your top 5 U.S. presidents? So that's a good question. I'm giving my opinion, but I'm doing this from as much of a historical perspective as possible. It's usually I slip in Kennedy, Reagan, or Eisenhower into the 5th spot. Then it's sometimes even James Monroe comes into my mind for that. But then the rest are easy. Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Jefferson is 4th. I think, and FDR also deserves top 5 consideration, but I think he's highly overrated. Theodore Roosevelt, Washington, and Lincoln at the top. I think those are pretty standard choices. No, his handling of World War II from an American perspective was incredible, other than the internment of Japanese Americans. Yes, FDR did an excellent job during the last World War. There's no doubt about it. Did you watch my live stream lectures on FDR and the video there on Franklin Roosevelt? And your top 5 is incorrect, but you have your right. You're entitled to that, and those are some good choices. Anyways, people don't know enough about Coolidge, Monroe, and McKinley, but they should. Those are really good presidents who Americans don't focus on enough. The United States always in depression, mass psychosis, psychological depression. Do you watch Mark Felton videos? His information on World War II subjects is amazing. I'll have to. Let me see here. Which I think we can all agree was horrific. Yes, it was. But doesn't research also boom in wartime? And military budgets for research also lead to civilian applications too? It can, but those are usually not released to the public, and there's not a deregulation of the economy where the military production and the military industrial complex is so chained to the government. Those technologies become available in peacetime. They are not available at that time. And those research was already going on before then. What was happening at Los Alamos was already kind of prefigured by some of the work of Bohr and Einstein from before then. So, but honorable mention, James K. Polk, yes, absolutely. What role did China play in World War II? World War III, as I call it, but it's good to see you, Zimpel. Love your long-term friendly neighborhood historian. You can be too by liking and subscribing. China was, I talked about it earlier, you might not have been here, but China basically was where I think the war starts, is 1937 with the Marco Polo Bridge false flag, where the Japanese bait the Chinese into attacking them. This leads to the Japanese invasion and some of the most horrific atrocities of any world war, of any war in history, including Unit 731 and the abuse at Nanjing. There's another word for it, but I don't want to use that word. But China kind of played the resistance from there, using their large amount of territory. Both the communist and the Gomindang and the Kuomintang, which was the nationalist side, put aside their own civil war, and were aided and bolstered by the British and Americans to fight against the Japanese and to try to push them out of their country. So it played an integral role in the future of the war itself, and it strengthened the claims and popularity of Mao and the communists, which allowed them to eventually turn the tide after the war was over. So China probably wouldn't have become communist without the Japanese invasion from 8 years before the war ended. Will you tell us about Thomas Cochrane? I don't know a huge amount about him. Good to see you, Belisarius. Let me see here. Top one historic meal. Can't say I have one off the top of my head. I'll have to think about that one. What do you think about the World Economic Forum's ideas dealing with degrowth? It's a shrinking idea. Is it part of that Great Reset thing? I'm not a huge expert on it, and I don't want to give too much political analysis without a super chat. Why does the economy go so bad? Economies go up and economies go down. But the one thing economies don't do is disappear off the face of the earth. If you were a young 20-year-old in the circa 1940s, do you think you would have volunteered for the war? Would you have gone Army, Navy, Airman? I probably would have been drafted. I probably would have gone GI. Chester Arthur is underrated, but not a great president. He's an okay president. Good top three, Harry. Good top three. Why does war start? Usually, machinations for power, glory, or a perceived offense, which usually is done because people want that power, that glory, and that land. Resources is also another huge reason why wars start. It used to be that you didn't have to have justifications for war. It's a modern concept that you need to heavily account for civilian casualties and also have a justification for war. Was the Gulf of Tonkin incident a false flag? Could have been, maybe, not sure. Of course, 1965, the attack at the Gulf, or 1964 by an American naval vessel by the Vietnamese, which may have not been an attack at all, or may have been the U.S. attacking its own vessel. What was the excuse Lyndon Johnson, who had succeeded Kennedy, needed to call for escalation with the Gulf of Tonkin resolution in 1965? The United States got ramped up their involvement in the war. 99% of stabbings are done not for religion. But why? There's a stabbing because of religion. It makes it big news. But domestic violence or gang violence played down. Desensitization to certain topics, and an overabundance of people wanting to blame religion for problems. Religion can be problematic, and religion is problematic in many cases, but religion is just a cultural apparatus for how people relate to each other, and it can be just as good or bad as non-religion. Is there any historical reasons Japanese are so neat and pouting, less likely to cheat? The Japanese are known for having a very clean society where cleanliness, organization, it's part of Zen Buddhism. It's also part of Shinto. Organization has been a huge part of Japanese society and culture throughout its history. What makes this channel so interesting is the remarkable questions. Smart people are here, so enjoyable. And indeed, we get people who are great people who come into the channel, at least one or two people every time we have a live stream. It's like, well, thank God I found you guys. And you know what? They usually ask great questions and bring up great topics, so thank God we have them. Top historic meal is definitely Nixon's last meal. His cottage cheese, pineapple. The man was insane. Yeah, that sounds like something Nixon would eat. Has there been any instances of aliens in history, like alien sculpture, drawings, interactions? People believe they're aliens, star visitors, the Anunnaki and Assyrian culture, the Nephilim in the Bible. People believe they're encountering what could be considered ancient aliens all throughout human history, but that doesn't mean that I want a 6-hour marathon on it on the History Channel. How was the 1950s considered a peacetime when we had proxy wars globally competing with the USSR on the geopolitical chessboard? It wasn't the World War. There you go. Yes, there was the growth of the military-industrial complex, but it was a domestically peaceful time for the United States, especially after Korea ends in 1953. Grapefruit and celery is an interesting one. Thank you. I know Garfield wasn't president for very long, but if he would have lived, he would have been incredible. Yes. Thank you for subscribing, BPD. We're so glad you did, and we're so glad you're here. Do you think the KGB under Putin started the Chechen War? I wouldn't be surprised at all. Taking down Conkling was enough to easily make him one of the best Republicans. Yep, Roscoe Conkling, the Republicans had their own corrupt political machine. He was working on it. It was Chester Arthur who did it, despite being one of the former members of that corrupt political patronage system in the 1880s and 1870s. What would have America looked like if Muhammad Ali was president? They've been the greatest of all time, man. I'm sorry, I won't do that. Tell us, and thank you for the super chat. Huzzah, indeed. Tell us some about Cromwell. Oliver Cromwell is a leader of a parliamentary revolution against the king known as the English Civil War. Now, the English have had about 4 or 5 civil wars. They just don't call it that, the War of the Roses and the Anarchy. Go read my Substack article on that. You guys can learn a lot. And watch my series on English monarchs. But there's an interregnum between 1649 and 1660 where the English let the British, Scottish and English, and later they actually conquered the Irish under Cromwell. Thanks to a newly designed military of Cromwell, the New Model Army, were able to overthrow King Charles I, basically accuse him of being guilty of treason and execute him. His family flees, and for 11 years, Parliament calls the shots, but Cromwell becomes kind of sick of Parliament's continual nonsense, so he dissolves Parliament. He doesn't rule as a king, but he does let his son take over after him. He calls himself a Lord Protector of England and Scotland, and in 1655, I think is successful in conquering Ireland, something no English king had ever been able to do. So, kind of a fascinating thing. And loving the Shaw caller, well, I really appreciate that. I love President Grant because I think he was a brilliant person, but I'm so happy he didn't win the nomination. Yep. Harry, you're spot on the money when it comes to American presidents. It's amazing how Japan just changed their mind to all cut cutesy after what they did in the war. Well, the United States basically told them they couldn't have much of a military, and now they're kind of changing their mind about that because of North Korea. People believe matter was created from nothing, i.e. Big Bang. You would be surprised how gullible and illogical humans can be. Yes, but I'm not, and you're not either, Sean. Oliver Cromwell, the first king, known as King Oliver the First. You do any martial arts? Yes, karate, as a matter of fact. Do you look into operations like CONINTEL? Yes, I was talking about Contrapol and things like that. Operation Mockingbird. The United States government has had their fingers in too many pies. Do you think BRICS will replace the USD? No, but maybe for those areas of the world it will. What was lavatory used like before the modern toilet and toilet paper? How did you go and how did you wipe? Chamber pot. We have so many modern amenities. People use their hands, oftentimes. And this is why disease was so rampant and so easy to get. Contaminations of water sources because of trenches dug from outhouses led to cholera and epidemics. People sometimes just went in the water. Is it common for American schools K to 12 to teach about the exchange of disease between the Spanish and natives, but not the English and the natives? It sometimes is, but all should be taught about. Columbian exchange applied to more than just the Spanish. Who are your top 3 infamous figures throughout history? Stalin, Genghis Khan, Rasputin. I'm kind of spreading them out a little bit. They're different people. I think when it comes to, but take out Stalin, put in Hitler, because Hitler is more infamous than Stalin, probably should be for many good reasons, but yeah. Which part of history has the worst barbarians? Barbarians exist all throughout history and in different contexts. We often think of barbarians as the people who helped bring down the Roman Empire in the 4th and 5th centuries, but the Mongols were seen as barbarian invaders. The Huns were seen as barbarian invaders. Barbar was what the noises the barbarians made, and that's where the Romans got that name from. The Shengyu, though, in the western steppes of China, were known as barbarians. Barbarians are anyone who is not in the mainstream of a developed civilization, who attacks that civilization and invades it and raids and takes land. The Vikings can be seen as barbarians. And in many ways, the Spanish were the barbarians to the Aztecs and the Mayans. And so sometimes it's even more relative than we think. Of course, probably the most aggressive and famous barbarians were the Goths, and they basically divided up much of the Western Roman Empire and continually harassed the East, which became known as the Byzantine Empire. Let me see. Sponge on a stick. Short end of a stick. Yep. That's true too. Genghis Khan fascinates me. What's your favorite fact about him? Murdering the people who buried him so they would never find out where he was. What was the Nazi view of black humans when older German officers Africans in World War I and fascist allies? Yeah, the Nazis did not really care what older military officers fought unless they were on their side. Hitler used Hindenburg, the German hero from the battle against Russia, to basically launch himself into political power. The Nazis didn't care about anyone who wasn't going to be of service to them. They did have a lot of respect for ancient German military customs. They believed that Africans were inferior, not as invidious in their mind as the Jews were, but certainly inferior. So Jesse Owens in 1936 at Berlin Olympics is obviously quite appalling to Hitler. Refuses to shake his hand for that reason. The Japanese are changing their mind in military expansion because of China's imperialist ambitions to take over Taiwan is their biggest concern. That's one of them, but North Korea attacking South Korea is always on the plate as a double whammy there. Caesar, Napoleon, Genghis Khan, good ones too. Was nudity popular in Japan and India before the Portuguese came to South Asia? No. I mean, it's not unpopular in certain contexts, like it's not unpopular even in the most draconian and conservative of societies. Japan is awesome, absolutely. Hars, put up my video on Japanese Christianity if you want to learn more about Japan and the rise of the Tokugawa shogunate and the story of Shogun, the famous book and TV series. Please do that. We've been going for 75 minutes. Usually we only go an hour, but you guys are asking such great questions. Are terrorist barbarians? They could be seen that way. I know it's subjective, but we tend to say Hitler was bad and Stalin was bad. Should we also apply to Churchill, FDR, de Gaulle, Truman? I mean, when you consider the fact, I mean, what do you mean by bad? This is why the Holocaust, when you count the deaths from the Holocaust, it's far less than the deaths caused during the war. But it's far more noteworthy in some ways because it's not an incident of warfare, it's an incident of genocide, of wiping out people just because of who they are. Truman destroys hundreds of thousands of lives with Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But is he guilty of a genocide? This is where we've gotten so muddled in our understanding of genocide. But the truth of the matter is, events that happen in war can be war crimes or horrendous things, and sometimes they are genocides. But that's not the same thing as a genocide itself. And genocides can happen in peacetime, like Stalin and the Ukrainian Holodomor, or Mao and the Great Leap Forward. So, the killing fields of Cambodia is another one. What the Ottomans did to the Armenians, they did during the Great War, as a result of the Great War. So, yes, we should apply moral standards to those other people, but when we're talking about them being bad, you're referring to totalitarianism, mass genocide, dispossession, privation, authoritarianism, and those things apply to them. They don't apply as much to Churchill, FDR, de Gaulle. And even if they do, in some cases, it's not a catch-all. I mean, FDR did terrible things with the Japanese, but FDR did not wipe out millions of Japanese people just because he believed that the Japanese were inferior. So in that way, he's not bad, and Hitler is. Yeah, Greeks talk about black-skinned people ever? Yes, they did. Well, Harry, I know it's absurd to put them in the same category, but this is what people on the internet are doing nowadays because they don't care about history in its proper context. Good guys do bad things. For them, this idea of bad people have to be bad also means good people have to be good. No, it's more nuanced than that, to be sure, but that doesn't mean that you can't say some people are good and some people are bad. Thank you, historian, for a fantastic stream chat today. My pleasure, Emir. Thank you for your many super chats. Mao was much worse in killing. Well, but you also have to realize proportionality, Jaden. The Chinese population is a lot larger. That doesn't excuse it at all. 40 to 60 million people is horrific. It's astronomical that it doesn't get to be more than that. Stalin said the death of one man is a tragedy, the death of a million is a statistic, and in some ways he's correct. Many people, his Holocaust historians, have pointed out that the way to understand the Holocaust is not 6 million Jews and 5 million other people the Germans considered to be undesirables, Romani gypsies, Slavs, homosexuals, and communists, but 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1, one individual human being butchered for just who they are after another. Yes, and Dresden was awful. It was horrible. It was British repayment for the Battle of London and the bombing of London. Yes, there are horrible incidents committed by the Allies in that war. Why do we have to focus more on that than on the atrocities of the enemy? Let me see. Churchill and of the others are nowhere near as evil as Hitler and Stalin. Yeah, they're nowhere near. But we also have, because of people on the internet who think that they can stand in moral judgment on everybody, I have to defend these people. I have to acknowledge the sins of the Allies and some of their leaders, but also talk about how that's not the same thing. Putting hundreds of thousands of Japanese, horrible decision. Terrible idea. One of the worst things a president has ever done. Nowhere near the same as putting Jews in camps, then killing them if they don't work them to death. So, it was blamed on whites only. I don't know what you mean by that. If you learn about history, does it help you winning debates? Can you give us one example where you won the debate? Yes, learning about history, when I engage in philosophical, political, or religious debates with friends of mine or people that I know, I bring up history all the time because that's where I know I'm going to find something that maybe it doesn't agree with my point. Maybe I have to change my perspective. Maybe the history I know is wrong. I've been wrong about a lot of stuff. I've had to correct myself many times on this channel. But reading every comment, the truth of the matter, it's great to see you, by the way, but the truth of the matter is that a lot of people, when it comes to world history and things like that, understanding history, they don't care, and they don't use history in their argumentation. I do, but it doesn't always help me, but it usually does. Pat knew exactly what the Red Army was up to. It's true. It would have been very interesting had the United States followed Patton's instructions. The Soviets were not the good guys, and Hitler, and I mean not Hitler, Truman and FDR realized that right when the war was ending. So, yeah, and Truman would have been a criminal because you would have had a long-term occupation of Japan, you would have had a land invasion, or you would have had to starve millions of people to death. The Japanese weren't going to stop. Um, it's chilling to me when people who are on the right, who are supposed to be these pro-American forces, are constantly critiquing America's handling of these things. You're allowed to critique America, I suppose, and not lose your right-wing conservative credentials, I guess. But it's like you really aren't going to try to defend the country that you say you are America first for. It's absurdity. I have to watch Tucker Carlson interview Piers Morgan because I already watched some of the historical content and it just made my eyes roll yesterday. I was not thankful for that on Thanksgiving. And Churchill did cause the Bengal famine by redirecting food sources during the middle of the war. The Bengal famine never would have happened without the war. It is true. The Bengal famine does lie at Churchill's feet, but not as in a direct way as the Holocaust does at Hitler's. I just want to see how you reason through it. Hitler was the Holocaust, but remember that Stalin and Mao had epic kill numbers and Truman dropped 2 nukes. It's true. And Truman wrestled with that. I love the scene in Oppenheimer, one of my favorite movies, where Oppenheimer's talking to Truman and he feels horrible and disgusted by building this weapon. And Truman's like, who cares about you? I'm the one that dropped it. I'm the one that killed all those people. And Truman wrestled with that, from what I understand, for the rest of his life. And all leaders ultimately send young men to die en masse for trivial squabbles. War is always hell and requires tough choices from people of authority. True. But war can sometimes be for moral good. Freeing the Caribbean from the Spanish at the end of the 19th century was a good thing, even if it was based on the lie of the Maine being blown up by the Spanish Empire. Freeing Europe from the Nazis was a good thing. The result, now, a lot of Europe did not get free, but under the new management of the Soviets. But either way, that doesn't take away from defeating the Nazis being a good thing. This is called thinking about things in compartments and in proportionality. Not everything is caused inevitably by one thing or another. Churchill had a choice: staff Britain and the army or Indian civilians who were of no military importance. It's true. It's a terrible decision by Hitler. It's not a good thing. But it never would have been caused without the Japanese trying to get into India. Explain how genocide is completely bad when the overpopulation on Earth is hastening the process of global warming, detrimental to the human population as we know. The Earth is not overpopulated. It's that simple. The Earth is not overpopulated. There's a lot of people on the Earth, but it's not overpopulated. In fact, the world population is going to start decreasing, and in 50 years we will be talking about, if we're honest about it, underpopulation. We are where we're not able to produce what we need to actually survive because we have too few people, which has happened before in human history. It's not overpopulated. There was worries about that, but population growth stagnates as countries become economically and culturally prosperous. Look at China, the United States, and India is now doing it too. The goal of debate should not be to win. The goal of debate should be to discern truth. True. But I win. I don't believe we are getting the whole truth about the Holocaust. I mean, so here's my logic on that. And it's controversial, but it's fair. I think it's Scott Adams, or is it Nick Adams? The guy who I know he made Dilbert, so he's not like a historian, but it doesn't mean he can't be right about it. He thinks we should analyze the Holocaust and the results of it scientifically, and I absolutely agree. You should be allowed to question everything in history. Absolutely everything in history. And I am okay with that, but I am not okay with people who are trying to undermine the importance of the Holocaust, or Holocaust deniers who say, see, the fact that you can't ask questions, I just did. But they're hiding the truth from me. Who's they? And it's always, and ironically, it's the same thing the Nazis would have told you. It's the Jews. So, I mean, we should be able to analyze these things and ask questions about all of it seriously and critically. But that doesn't mean that we automatically deny it. And it doesn't mean that we automatically believe the deniers or doubters. It's not doubt to ask questions. But the way you ask the question can be quite dubious, which means doubtful. As horrendous as that is, it was the situation he had, and under the circumstances handled it okay. I don't know about that. This is a history stream. ITD. Who do you think the most influential person of the 20th century has been so far? I don't think there has been anyone who has affected the world as much as Bin Laden. Bin Laden, obviously. I think Xi Jinping, Putin, and Trump are all up there for better or for worse. changing Barack Obama. They've changed so much of the world changed because of these people. And I'm not saying that's good. I'm not saying it's a great thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying it happened. Let me see. A lot of people are stupid and ruled by emotion. That's true. And sometimes I am. And it's not just that people are always ruled by emotion and therefore they can't think critically about topics like history and social sciences, which we talk about here all the time. But it's that sometimes I'm ruled by emotion and I can't think about this stuff reasonably. Sometimes I get too close. Sometimes I'm too far away. Sometimes I'm Goldilocks. I'm just right. They didn't have to nuke civilians. What could they have done to stop the Japanese? Because invading the island would have meant killing civilians. Starving the island would have meant killing civilians, and the Soviets getting involved in the war would have meant, for sure, more dead civilians, because the Soviets didn't give a rip about killing civilians. Look at what they did in Eastern Europe right before they wanted to join the war. Truman used the bombs to fend off the Soviet Union because he didn't want them getting more land, more power, and more influence. And whenever the Soviet Union had more land, power, and influence, more people suffered. Discussion on the Magna Carta. What is it? Its impact, the precedent. Thank you for asking. Somebody put up my Hearts. Can you put up the video I did on the Magna Carta? I have an entire series on English monarchs, so I talk about King John, but I also have a video on the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta, signed in 1215, means Great Charter. It had to be renewed several times because the Pope, who actually kind of owned England at the time, got rid of it. But basically, the Magna Carta said that the king has to get the consent of his nobles and barons in order to raise money and troops. He cannot just do things on a whim. It was the first limits built on already existent English common law, is created by John's father, Henry II, to basically say the king was under the law. And this is the first we hear of the consent of the governed, and it laid the foundations for discussing parleying with the House of Lords. And so Parliament eventually comes out of it. Yes. How messed up, in your opinion, was Polk sending troops into Mexican territory to antagonize them into shooting first to just start a territory war? It's pretty messed up, but it's not anything anyone else would have done in that situation if they had wanted more land. Polk was a bully. Presidents have been bullies. China has first-hand experience with population control laws. There you go. When has underpopulation happened, and what did it look like? The Black Death in Europe created a crisis of underpopulation. The Justinian's plague created a crisis of underpopulation that severely restricted the productivity of Western and Eastern Europe during the 7th and 8th centuries. And we are not overpopulated. I know people believe that, and it's easy to think that, but we're actually stagnating in population and depleting our population. And Africa is the only continent that has seen population growth in the last 10 years, at least population rate. And some populations are almost going to become extinct by the end of the century if they don't start growing, like parts of Europe and Korea and Japan. And this is about history. People are asking questions about history, but we've got a lot of other stuff going on. Yes, that's true. Somebody causing a famine that kills millions of people is not that simple. They don't like you asking questions, the Jews. I ask plenty of questions to Jews. I know many of Jews. I ask questions all the time. There's nothing wrong with asking questions. It's the way the questions are framed. It's the way you go on with the questions and all of that. You can ask a question like, how do we know for sure that there were these number of casualties in the Holocaust? That's not anti-Semitic. As opposed to, the Jews I think the Jews might be lying about the Holocaust in order to gain sympathy and power, so we should really take a look at these numbers. What are the real numbers? Those are two very different ways to ask a similar question, but one has a much more leading influence than the other. Let me see. No, they don't like asking questions because if you ask them a question, everything is the fault of the Jews. That's true. And the same people who want to blame the Jews if they think the Holocaust numbers are exaggerated, it's the Jews' fault. Because the Jews did that to gain power. The Jews let 6 million people die, or hundreds of thousands, or how many of these ridiculous people think died during the Holocaust, in order to gain a state in Israel, which they were already going to gain anyways. It's historical ignorance, but it's always the Jews' fault. When people come onto this channel and ask me, and I wrote about this in my recent Substack article, when people come onto this channel and ask me, why were the Jews kicked out of 109 countries, they are almost always asking that in the sense of they almost never even say the Jews. They say, which people were kicked out of 109 countries, so that it's a leading question, so that you can say it, so that they can say they didn't say it. And what should we make of the fact that they were thrown out of these countries? The same anti-Semitism that guides those questions is often the reason why the Jews were expelled from as many countries as they've been expelled to. Do you have a favorite Thanksgiving food? Mac and cheese, which is totally Thanksgiving food. But it's great to have you, Belisarius. You don't think Russian civs won't utilize Putin? They might. It all depends on how Putin ends. I think he's doing what he's doing now so he can be immortalized, so he will not be lambasted by the future, which he certainly should be. Columbus, who was a Jew who was kicked out of Spain, not quite, but many Jews were kicked out of Spain right after Columbus, and they didn't know he was Jewish. Some believe the successful Afghan war against USSR emboldened East Bloc nations to peacefully eject. Yeah, probably. I don't know how copper wire is made. I'm the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel. I don't share my name. And thank you for the super chat. I really appreciate that. Nick Fuentes is right. America first. Why is it only a guy in his basement incel who is right about that? Aren't there other people who think America first who don't also say stupid nonsense about women, the Holocaust, and African Americans? But thanks for the super chat. Why were Jews more hated in Europe than Muslims? Would Muslims not be more hated? No, the Jews were more. The Jews were seen as the ones who killed Christ. The Muslims were seen as mortal enemies, and they were certainly hated. The Europeans fought many wars to keep the Muslims out. Their behavior is why people dislike them. Well, what behavior? By who? You're using the them then thing. You're obviously Israeli. Yes, I am clearly Israeli. I'm an American historian who has studied U.S. history and European history all of my life. I have talked about things, and I am obviously Israeli. Just because I don't condemn the Jews, I am a Jew. Isn't that just how bad it's gotten? I do not have an OnlyFans, but thanks for thinking I do. Are Jewish people a race or a religion? Jew is a race and ethnicity more than a race, because there are black Jews, there are white Jews, there are Asian Jews. Jews refer to the ethnicity that's usually passed down culturally, matrilineally through the mother. The religion is Judaism. Do the Jews fund us independence from Britain? Who's us? I don't know. What is all this modern Jew hatred happening in the world? Blaming the Jews for everything seems delusional, like they are the boogeyman or something. It is a boogeyman. It's also a way for people, and it's on the far left, but it's also on the far right, to blame someone for their problems. You can't afford a house in the United States because America gives too much money to the Jews in Israel, which is absurd nonsense. Doesn't show. I don't do political analysis usually about a super chat, but just shows lack of any sort of economic knowledge whatsoever. But it's funny. It's the Jews are the reason you can't do this. The Jews are the reason you can't afford a house. The Jews are the reason we lost the Great War. The Jews are the reason that our foreign policy is messed up. The Jews are the reason that Germany is no longer great. Do you see how what this thinking leads to? It's the same parallels. And the crazy part about it now is it's on the right and the left. Ancient Israel is not modern Israel. Check out modern Kabbalah. Kabbalah is Jewish mysticism that's based in Hasidism, which is a form of Orthodox Judaism. I am very well aware of what Kabbalah is, and it doesn't have anything. Your historical knowledge would make you a great host on current political analysis. It goes hand in hand. It does. Thank you so much for that. But a lot of people wouldn't want to hear me because I'm going to throw the history at them, and people want one level answers, not the complexity that history gives in answers. What is all this modern? So yeah. But by the way, Gobo, by asking that question about why people hate Jews, you are clearly a Jew. You are clearly an Israeli. You are clearly part of the problem. You must be paid by them. I've been accused of being paid by AIPAC. I have a very small history channel on YouTube, relatively. We have over 10,000 subscribers. You could be one too. But, I mean, it's not what you think. It's just so absurd to me. Anyways, it's crazy but very predictable. Let me see here. Will we see the start of construction of a literal third temple in the Holy Land one day? Will an Israeli leader ever sanction it, or evangelicals? I just don't think it's possible right now with too much tension with the Palestinians. It's not going to happen anytime soon. Them building on the same site as the Dome of Iraq, which was built by Muslim conquerors in an act of colonization. All of you leftists who want to talk about Israel being a colonizer state need to recognize that the Arabs colonized Israel too. It's just not going to happen. Fuentes getting attention because of his personal war with Ben Shapiro. Yes, you have to go after someone as big as Ben Shapiro, who I'm the one going after because I'm in a talking fast competition with him. The idea that you would go after me is ridiculous, folks. It's absolutely ridiculous. Literally the worst thing you could do. Sorry, I won't do that again. Ancient Israel is not modern Israel. I already answered that. It's the same for Donald Trump's big theory. It's because we keep subsidizing Europe that America is poor. It's true, but it's not rooted in hatred for Europeans. And it's not used it is kind of used as a scapegoat, but it's not used on the same dimension, and it's not used to personally castigate and hate Europeans because of their race or ethnicity, or to create a giant conspiracy theory about them. And I'm going to have to move because I'm at 1% on my... So bear with me as I turn off all my lighting equipment so I can charge my phone. I will get a charger right here so that you guys can still see me. Move this light over here. Most of the money I use for the channel, by the way, that you guys give me, goes into the channel. So if you guys give money, donations, super chats, memberships, I use it to make this entire experience better for all of you guys. So anyways, I got to wrap it up. I'm at 93 minutes. We usually only go an hour, but an hour and a half. I mean, it's been crazy, but it's been wonderful because we've got so many great questions. Maybe I'll only go a half hour tomorrow because of that. Can you please make more long form videos where you talk normal speed? I'll try. What do you think about what David Ricardo said about diminishing returns on land and overpopulation? Don't know because I haven't actually heard him on it. If a Jew would convert to Christianity, would Nazis put them in a concentration camp saying they are Jews based on race? I think so. I'm not sure. That's a great question, actually, Jaden. Christ is king. See, this is a dog whistle. People why is that? I don't know why a term like that is controversial, but a lot of people have called it a dog whistle. That's why the three wise men said Jesus was going to change the world. I don't know about that. Even if that was the case, that the Israeli government is not the Jews, Jewish people are just people. That's like saying the American government are not American. And in a way they aren't, because there are 2 million Arabs in Israel who are not Jews. And some of them serve in the Knesset. And there's no Jews serving in Syria's government or Saudi Arabia, but that doesn't matter to people on the internet who are more obsessed with hating Jews than they are with truth. Honestly, I appreciate you being willing to come on here and answer questions. Well, it's my pleasure, Jason. It's great to have you here. So, anyways, what part of history is not documented? Prehistory, stuff that happened more than 6,000 or 7,000 years ago. 7, sorry. Hit Europeans because they try to erase the entire middle piece of history that separates European colonization and European slavery. There is a lot of hatred for Europeans and European history. That's true. Let me see here. I'm confused on why the Jewish people will not let the search of Solomon's treasure continue. Saw some videos on archaeologists. I don't know enough about that. I mean, it would be interesting. I'm always pro-archaeology, but it's one of those controversial things where it's like the native peoples don't want it, so what do you do with it? You know, it's like it's like harvesting places in Africa by the Europeans. Well, thank you for being here next time. I can't promise a 95-minute live stream, but I mean, Hassan Piker does it for hours. I don't know how he does it, but what's your current favorite long-form video up on your channel? My World War I video, which is about the 7 Years' War. But I have a video on all 3 world wars. So, Hars, could you put the video on each world war up? And Wicked, hello, good to see you. Jesus is the fulfillment of the promises of Messiah to ancient Israel and to the world. Yeah, that's not an anti-Semitic perspective. That's just called being a Christian, which you're allowed to be. First of all, nobody is religious. Religion is a form of mental disorder. Science is religion too. Scientism is a religion where you make science basically the only thing you believe. Religion is just a form of how people unite in a culture and interact with each other. I don't share my religious perspectives because it's too controversial. Does Israel have mass migration like Europe? It has in the past. Today in my country, a migrant from Islamic country stabbed a nun. So many immigrants coming, it's crazy. I'm sorry to hear that, Dave. This is a history channel, though. This is a Wendy's. I'm not going to address a political topic. I usually do political analysis objectively as possible with a super chat. And hello, Jaden. In Animal Kingdom, they are different species of ants that lives different parts of the world. Isn't it the same with humans? To some extent. Stratification, needing leaders, being willing to subject yourself to leadership and to the wants of your rulers is common in the animal and mammalian and human species. Yes. Is there a correlation between the Philistines, the ancient enemies of the Jews, and the Palestinians? No. The Philistines were a group of sea people, probably from somewhere in the Mediterranean, who settled in different cities like Gaza, for instance, but they have no correlation. The reason they are called Palestinians, the Jews who resettled in Israel in the early 20th century were called Palestinians, is because of the renaming of that land, Palestina, by the Roman Emperor Hadrian after the Bar Kokhba revolt was put down in 136 AD. Do you think Islam is an existential threat to the West in terms of population birth trends? There are many Muslims in the West who are not trying to build a fifth column. I think that's conspiratorial to some extent. But yeah, there are many Muslims who there's cultural clashing that's going on, which happens with every immigrant group that comes to a certain area of the world, and that should not be confused with radical terrorism. And so, but there is a lot of worry about what areas will look like when they become more and more Islamic because of the cultural clashes, and how much assimilation is happening by the refugees and immigrants and their families in Europe and the United States by these immigrant communities who come from the Middle East, bringing very, very different cultures that are heavily influenced by more radical forms of Islam. They aren't, but again, none of this makes them terrorists, absolutely not. But there's obviously a cultural clash between Pakistan and the way people live there and the way people live in France and Great Britain historically. Yeah. So we must defend the palace of all my sons rally to your positions. Okay, then. Good luck with that. Isn't Solomon's treasure a dangerous thing? If what he did is true, would it make sense why Jews? I don't know enough about it to really comment. So, did you know the Harris hawk is the only hawk in the world that will work together to hunt? Sound about right. People forget they are Jews, Christians in Gaza, so Israel is also hurting Christians in Gaza as well. I just wish countries would learn that nobody wins in war. Each side sacrifice, lost its life. That's very true, Juniper. There are more Christians proportionally in Israel than there are in Gaza. People who bring up the Christian suffering in Gaza as a way to trigger people on the right to hate Israel constantly ignore that fact, but people ignoring facts is why I'm a historian, because I try my absolute darndest not to ignore facts, but it is absolutely true. There are many people who are suffering in Gaza in horrible circumstances. You can be extremely critical of Israel and the way it's handled the war without being an anti-Semite, or without saying Israel has should cease to exist, or the Palestinians don't have a right to a state. You don't have to be one or the other. Here, that's the incredible thing when you study history, is you learn you don't have to be one or the other. The Pilgrims were not all bad or all good, and neither were the natives. They were humans. Humans do different things based on different circumstances. What countries do you mostly want to visit because you have an interest in their history? Where and what period? Russia, definitely. The emphasis of my study is on Russia, so I want to go to Russia. Why would Christians want to live in an open-air prison? There are Palestinian Christians in the West Bank and Gaza who have had families there for a long time. They are mistrusted and hated by both the Palestinians and the Jews. If a person with white ancestry had facial features of a Jew, would Nazis put him in a concentration camp? I'm not sure. Maybe. I think they did a lot of research and digging into the ethnicities of people. What's your favorite preparatory ancient site? Baalbek. Do you think nowadays our values and customs are what we see on TV? Like 100 years ago, British people covered themselves at beaches, and now they wear bikinis. TV has changed. People, sight and visuals really get a lot of attention, and television is such a visual aid that getting as much attention as possible has become a huge thing for TV. Baalbek, by the way, is a large megalith, a series of large stone buildings that nobody knows exactly how it got there in modern-day Lebanon. Anyways, I'm going to sign off. We've been at this for over an hour and 40 minutes, which means I guess I can do a 20-minute live stream tomorrow and just answer questions for 20 minutes. But that will be at 6 p.m. Eastern. I hope you all join me for that. Thank you for a very, very good propaganda channel, by the way. You mean my channel? I don't know how my channel is a propaganda channel, but yeah. But hope you all have a really, really great day. And if you found something that I said wrong, please fact check me. Please tell me why I'm wrong and explain it. And also, email me if you want a longer conversation. friendlyneighborhoodhistory@gmail.com. I'm always willing to learn and to grow with the help of all of you. I hope you are all doing great. I'm doing great. It's been a very, very wonderful chat with all of you guys. And yeah, make sure to like and subscribe on your way out. Check out those long-form videos. Follow our social medias. Read my articles on Substack. Get the bonus content on Patreon or become a member here. And consider the TikTok where you get a bunch of extra content that you won't get here, and vice versa. Yeah. Yes, all I do is spew Jewish propaganda. Yes, I am clearly being paid by AIPAC, which is why I'm charging my phone right now, because I don't have enough charging ports by my other chair, because AIPAC didn't pay for that. But yes. And Juniper, rest your mind. Thank you for joining us. I enjoyed it immensely having you here. I'm here as always. They're wearing war ceremony headdress that they brought on their trip to Montana. Yes, it's not uncommon for Indians to wear feathers in other parts, John. But all right, I hope you all have a great, great Friday and a very, very wonderful rest of your weekend. And hopefully you spend part of that with us 6 p.m. tomorrow. Check out the long-form video coming out later today, and my short-form videos that are available for you every day. So thank you so much. And yes, I'm clearly am. But thank you, Harry, for joining when you did, and I'm glad to have you here. Take care, everybody, and we'll see you tomorrow, 6 p.m. Eastern. Bye-bye now, and remember, love history.